Hey everyone, welcome to the AnexiPod, the official podcast for Anexinet. This is episode 8 for November 2nd, 2016. I'm your host, Ned Bellavance, Enterprise Architect for Infrastructure Solutions at Anexinet and purveyor of fine comestibles and potables. Here on the AnexiPod, we talk technology for the enterprise, covering infrastructure, app dev, analytics, and anything else that is shiny. On this episode, we will be talking about continuous integration and delivery with my colleagues Tim George and Tom Jadico. Before we dive in, I have a couple quick notes. This is the first podcast being recorded at the brand spanking new StudioX here in Anexinet headquarters. I now have some real recording gear and a dedicated room to record in. I'll be posting some pictures up on my Twitter feed in case you're curious. Also, the Anexibyte segment of the podcast is being moved to its own separate production. That will be a bi-weekly podcast covering the latest news in tech with me and 2 other guests from Anexinet, discussing the stories and their implications in the IT landscape. I'll be keeping the format to only 30 minutes, so it's a quick listen in the car on your commute to work. The first episode will be recorded and released next week, and I will be posting links to it on Twitter. With that out of the way, on to the interview. I'm joined today by Tim George, Solution Architect for App Dev, and Tom Jadico, Director of App Dev here at Anexinet. How are you guys doing today, Tim and Tom?
Doing well, Ned. Thanks for having us.
Yes, Ned. Doing well, thanks.
Awesome. So I know you both are involved in application delivery, but that's a fairly broad discipline. So is there a particular area that each of you focus on?
Ned, we primarily focus on building applications for clients. Again, that is a broad statement. So at a high level, a client has a business need and they've decided they need a new system or enhancement to an existing system. We meet with a client to better understand their application needs. Then we start discussing a long list of items to build out a project roadmap. These items include understanding the business drivers and competitive landscape, scheduling sessions to gather the requirements and business workflow, defining a development methodology, discussing resources, and identifying a preliminary schedule that attempts to meet their delivery goals. Once we get some of those basics out of the way, we start digging into technology. We need to discuss a high-level system architecture, development tools, and infrastructure needs. One item you cannot forget is DevOps. Identifying the plan allows you to support the process of reliably moving a tested application through the environment in an efficient manner.
So what I'm hearing from you, and this isn't a surprise, is that planning goes ahead of selecting technologies or delving any deeper. If you don't have a good roadmap, you're going to get lost, right?
That is correct, and I think that's going to dovetail right into the rest of our conversation today.
Excellent. So the topic we're here to discuss today is continuous integration and continuous delivery. But before we dive into those 2 topics, can you provide some high-level background on where CI and CD fit into the larger app dev construct? Are these components of agile software development? Are these part of DevOps, etc.?
Yes, CI and CD are definitely components of agile and DevOps methodologies. One goal of an agile process is to work backlog items off from sprint to sprint, reliably delivering software in short intervals. A solid DevOps CI and CD plan ensures code quality and prevents hangups when moving an application to a different environment.
Okay, so with that out of the way, what is continuous integration and how do I get started working with it?
Ned, continuous integration is a development practice where developers integrate regularly via source code repository so that errors can be detected and located quickly. A great quote I read states, "Continuous integration doesn't get rid of bugs, but it does make them dramatically easier to find and to remove." When it comes to continuous integration, many people believe that setting up a build server to monitor commits, to build the source code, and then run unit tests is all that it takes to adopt continuous integration. But there's more to it than that. Again, continuous integration is a practice, not a tool set. To adopt continuous integration as a practice in your organization, the development team needs to do a couple of things. Developers need to provide coded tests of the features they develop. agree to commit regularly and often to source control, and monitor build quality as reported by the build server.
All right, Tim, let me add a little to this. Another principle of an agile development methodology is transparency. With the build server, as code is committed, the code is built, and if unit tests are written, they are executed. In situations where there are errors, these errors are reported out to the team. A manager or anyone on the team can monitor this and use this as an additional tool to gauge how a sprint is progressing. If builds and unit tests are continually failing, or if there doesn't seem to be the appropriate number of unit tests being executed, attention can be focused in more of a proactive fashion.
Right, so what I'm hearing is, in addition to writing code, developers need to produce tests to make sure the code is doing what they expect it to do. But it's not enough to just do that. Because, I mean, if developers are just doing their own testing, is that different than continuous integration?
It's a part of continuous integration, Ned, but it's only a part. In addition to regular, frequent commits and coded tests, the build server adds complete regression of all affected code, not just the code the developer is currently working on or the project the developer is currently working on. Also, I would argue, how can you ensure that developers have compiled and run appropriate tests before checking into the source control system? In reality, other than by a set of development guidelines, you really can't. Continuous integration is an implementation of the guidelines set forth upon the developers to enforce compliance even when forgotten or even skipped by a developer.
Right, so it's sort of a trust but verify model.
Exactly.
And that trust only goes so far. So aside from doing this continuous build and doing sort of a full test of the entire application every time, are there other benefits that can be found through continuous integration?
Yes, Ned, there are some other benefits that you get with continuous integration. Using a build server, you ensure that the code is built using a common configuration. You're not going to run into the situation where a developer might have installed the latest beta release of a software and compiled code, and then when you go to deploy the code, it won't run because the production servers don't have that library available. Additionally, build servers will label the releases and make those releases reproducible and deployable again at a future time. A continuous integration server will also give you timely and transparent feedback of the quality of the code and even produce statistics as to how many codes have been run, the percentage of the time that they pass, as well as other statistics that can be useful by management. Lastly, continuous integration, because it's providing feedback to the developers in a timely fashion, allows developers, while the code changes they've made are fresh in their brain, to go quickly back and identify issues that may have arisen from a recent check-in.
Well, that sounds like a really good feature. I mean, there have been times that I've written a very detailed and long script or some code and then used it and forgotten about how I wrote it or why I wrote it. And then if an issue arises later, I have to get myself back in the mindset of how I wrote it and why I wrote it that way. So this sounds like I'll find that bug early on while it's all still fresh in my brain, right?
Exactly. And you get the benefit of fixing it quickly.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's assume that I'm sold on implementing CI processes. What sort of tools are available to help me in implementing continuous integration?
As we talked about earlier, continuous integration is a practice, not something that can be solely solved with tools. That said, there are a lot of tools available for facilitating continuous integration. In Microsoft Suite, there's Team Foundation Server and Visual Studio Team System. Both of these products expose build definitions for performing CI. And Jenkins and TeamCity are other popular CI tools.
And if I remember correctly, so Team Foundation Server would be like the on-premise version, whereas Visual Studio Team System is a hosted SaaS offering from Microsoft, right?
Yeah, that is correct, yes.
And Jenkins is open source.
Both Jenkins and TeamCity are, I guess, free, they would call it. TeamCity, though, gets into, once you get to a certain number of agents and build configurations, you have to pay for licensing.
Okay, good to know. I think I've got my arms around the CI portion of CICD. So let's move on to CD, continuous delivery. So when I see the acronym CICD, I know that the CI is for continuous integration, but I'm not sure if the CD is for continuous delivery or deployment. So can you help clarify for me what is continuous delivery versus continuous deployment, and are they the same thing?
Sure, Ned. Let's start with continuous delivery. Continuous delivery has three basic principles. The software being produced is always deployable, the deployment readiness of the code is visible to everyone, and that the deployment is automated for repeatability. Using these principles, there is a high confidence that the code deployed to one environment can be redeployed or promoted to another environment with the same level of success. Now, with continuous deployment, and whether that's the same thing as continuous delivery, this is a very common question, and there seems to be several schools of thought on this. The definition I align with defines continuous deployment as an extension of continuous delivery. So where continuous delivery is focused on keeping code deployable and regularly deploying to a production-like environment, continuous deployment, on the other hand, includes automatically deploying to production if automated tests pass without manual intervention.
Okay, that's interesting. So CD being continuous delivery sort of encompasses continuous deployment, or at least that's the way you see it.
Yes.
Okay. And so the idea of deploying to production if automated tests pass sounds a little scary. I don't know if I would necessarily be willing to that. Is that something that you see a lot of organizations doing?
In the projects I've worked on, no, I haven't seen a lot of continuous deployment. I've seen continuous delivery to user acceptance environments. Promoting something out of that environment into a production environment is something that's always been taken as a manual approval type process. And some businesses may not even allow for that depending on their regulations.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, let me jump in with one other point with that. One of the reasons that continuous deployment is challenging is the automated testing. So you really want to do a lights out test. So different than unit testing, automated testing is going to go really after two levels. You're going to have one go after your UI and run all your business rules, and then you might have another one going after your REST endpoints or something. So it's almost a whole other way of thinking for QA teams to build out those lights out scripts. So only some of the more advanced shops have taken things to that level.
Okay, well, that's good to know. All right. So continuous delivery seems synonymous with public cloud vendors and DevOps. So do I have to run up in the public cloud to use continuous delivery?
Definitely not. The continuous delivery practice is about delivering code to an environment in a scripted fashion. Whether the servers are bare metal or virtualized, located on premises, in a co-location facility, or in the cloud, continuous delivery can and should be used.
I imagine that running in a virtualized environment is probably a lot easier for the continuous delivery to different environments aspect, especially if you're building the environments themselves from scratch.
Yeah. In fact, this whole IAC, infrastructure as code, that is really, I guess, becoming a lot more prevalent. It's really, I guess, the public clouds or the clouds themselves is really building that out. Being able to script your environment and then deploy code into it, harness that application in that environment, test it, and then break it down to, remove those resources is really, I think, where the market is going. I think we've heard that it's called as a Phoenix environment, where you bring the environment up, you load the application, you use it, and then you really burn it back down again.
And then you build it up from the ashes?
That's exactly it, yeah.
That's cute. I like that. I've had the opportunity to dip my toe a little bit in infrastructure as code, mostly in the public cloud, using either AWS and their CloudFormation product or Azure and Azure Resource Manager templates, which allow you to, using JSON, basically create an entire environment, right, with a few variables and parameters thrown in there, and then you could deploy code on top of that. And then, if you just want to rip it all back down and build it back up, you can certainly do that. It makes the whole process repeatable, and if you want to set up a dev environment or a test environment or any additional environment, you can do that, and you can scale it to accommodate what makes sense. Because maybe you don't want a full-scale production environment for your dev.
Yeah, and I think a lot of development shops, when they have, I guess, the co-located facilities, and when somebody else is managing that, and you, you need to request the VMs to be built out, and then you deploy your code on top of that, if you can get to the point where you're using IAC and you can build that out yourself in the public cloud, it allows you to have these additional environments to run one-off types of tests. And then when you're done with the environment, you just break it back down again, so you're not getting charged for those resources.
Okay, great. So you've sold me on continuous integration and now maybe continuous delivery. But again, what sort of tools are available for implementing continuous delivery?
All right. So the tools for continuous delivery, you're going to hear some of the same names. You're going to see Microsoft TFS and VSTS both participate in that space. And Jenkins does for the use of plugins. And we've been successful using a product called Octopus Deploy. That's helped us and really works well with Microsoft.NET projects.
Octopus, huh? I like the sound of that. I can just envision the tentacles going out and delivering in all your different environments.
And that's exactly it. You set up tentacles on boxes.
So the terminology follows.
That's exactly right.
Just like with Chef, where you have recipes and use a knife and all that kind of good stuff. That's fun. So the CICD process, it seems great for greenfield projects where the legacy of a project isn't tying me down to a specific thing. But what if I do have a brownfield project? Can I use CI/CD in practices in that environment?
Absolutely. It's never too late to adopt continuous integration and continuous delivery practices. In terms of continuous integration, the first step might be to introduce a build server into the environment to monitor code check-ins and build the affected code. Next, maybe introduce, if not already present, unit tests to get coverage of the code that's being developed. Then, while working on legacy code and making fixes as bug reports come in, introduce unit tests, maybe follow a test-driven development methodology where you identify the broken code, write a test around it, and then fix the code. Now you are building an additional library of tests that can guarantee that the code will continue to function over time. For continuous delivery, you can begin scripting or converting existing scripts for deployments into a deployment tool such as Octopus. Additionally, you can refocus development priorities towards keeping the code releasable.
So that means that at any given moment, the code that is checked in is ready to release into an environment for additional testing before it goes to production?
Correct. You're checking in fully functional code.
It might be a little buggy.
Yes. Yeah, it could be a little buggy. It might not be complete, but it's not going to break the overall system.
Right. It's not going to hose up your entire environment.
Correct.
That's nice to know. You know, when I go to do a build, I'm not going to destroy my entire environment, and that it's at least I know it passed the unit tests. Right.
Correct. Yeah, these environments, setting up this CI/CD world is really good when teams change personnel all the time. And what you're doing is you're employing best practices of writing unit tests and having your code checked in so that the code's compiled all the time. And when you lay those patterns out for programmers, when new guys get brought onto the team, they start assimilating a lot, I guess, quicker to the environment because they're forced to follow the coding patterns of unit tests. They know if their code they're doing is breaking the build. So, you as a manager looking down or working with these programmers, I guess you can better gauge how they're working right away.
Okay. That seems like it's probably a pretty good thing to have.
Yeah. Nobody gets lost 2 months in a corner coding, and all of a sudden they say, hey, I'm checking my code in. Like, they're forced from day one, as they finish work, to check it in every day. Therefore, you're being brought into the team a lot quicker.
Right, so you're insulating yourself against staff churn and code churn.
Yeah, that's exactly right, yeah.
All right. So I may have mentioned that I did some infrastructure as a code because I'm an infrastructure guy. That's what I do. And CI/CD, it seems a little abstract to me, but can you give me some situations where maybe I could use CI/CD in an infrastructure or an ops team instead of just for developers?
Sure. Well, you brought up infrastructure as code or even a desired state configuration type tooling as Puppet or Chef, where you say that I need on this box IIS or a web server and let the tool figure out how to get that product installed for you. So there's the ability to define what your machines look like prior to the code being done. There's even thought up front that development is thinking and working with operations ahead of time to make sure that the requirements for deployment have been thought through early on, because you're deploying to each incremental environment as part of your continuous delivery. You need to know that information up front. So there's no more development finishing, working on an application, and the scenario of throwing it over the wall to the operations group to figure out how to install it.
Hey guys, just make this work. It worked in our lab. It should be fine.
Here's a Word document that describes what you need to do.
Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things with CICD and how it wraps into the whole DevOps world is you're really forcing both operations and developers and QA people and managers to be aware of how that code gets from the development shop all the way through the environments. Everybody's next kind of on the line. You're not really passing the buck anymore. Everyone's responsible for moving the code throughout the environments, and there's a lot better team education across that.
I imagine because you have thought through the requirements ahead of time and you have a better awareness of what goes into the application, the ability to have it scripted out and repeatable is there, right?
Absolutely.
Are there any other benefits that I would see as an infrastructure person?
Absolutely. Because these requirements are defined up front, they're scripted, and you're running through production-like environments through all of your testing, you can also begin to introduce security testing as part of your continuous integration effort. So you can put in tests that will check things like server headers and is SSL required or not.
Okay. Yeah, so it's interesting. I just completed a series of interviews with clients of Anexinet, and I asked them, what's coming in the future? What's your big challenge for the next year? And the most common response I got was security and compliance. We have to comply with this, with HIPAA or PCI DSS, and that's going to be a major initiative of ours. So it sounds like by using CICD and sort of the DevOps principles, you can bake that compliance into your unit testing, so when it goes to production, you're already there. You're already compliant.
Yes, you're looking for the issues early and often and making sure that you don't regress on any of those issues.
So I imagine all this automation and scripting and testing and early planning probably makes life a little easier for the day-to-day for the ops admin.
Absolutely. The typical operations person is not going to be burdened by continually being inundated with requests to deploy my application and make this change and do this thing. With proper scripted processes, the operations group has the ability now to do more important things, such as monitoring the infrastructure and looking at scalability and regular day-to-day operations.
So maybe doing stuff that's a little more interesting than just, building a web server.
Exactly.
I mean, as much as I love installing IIS.
Yeah, the other thing you get, the other benefit of doing some of this scripting to build out the servers is, as your team changes personnel again, it's not in one person's head when they're leaving. You have the processes documented. You should have your IAC under source control. Therefore, the knowledge isn't walking out of the door when somebody decides to switch jobs.
Right, yeah, and that is so often the problem, is all that knowledge is locked up in the brain. You hear people beating the documentation drum, right? But usually operations is so busy building and configuring and putting out fires that they have no time to document. Well, it sounds like if you follow these principles, the documentation is in the code.
It's self-documented.
And the process. Yeah, you've sort of self-documented.
Now, you can't build to a new environment until you run the self-documentation, so to speak. Yeah.
Right. That's a huge benefit to management and operations in general.
Sure. And then you get the state of the servers. If you use IAC, you can then, as you make modifications to the system and you check that into a source control system, you can actually then do diffs or look at the differences of those servers or how they're configured.
Right. So if I do make a change to my dev environment, change an operating system type, or I'm switching from Tomcat to IIS or something like that, and everything breaks, I can look back and go, okay, what was changed? And then maybe do some incremental testing to figure out what the breaking change was. And in the meantime, I can make sure that change doesn't roll forward to the other environments and break all of those as well.
And if you decide not to roll forward, you can always have it and roll back because you version controlled that version of that server.
Wow, that just sounds like magic. So we've talked about development, we've talked about ops, and a little birdie told me that you guys are running a DevOps workshop that covers a lot of what we talked about today. Can you tell me a little bit about the workshop and what someone could learn by attending?
Sure. So Anexinet was continually getting asked about DevOps. In these discussions with clients, we always cover the basics of DevOps and talk about certain tools that can be used to implement that vision. The challenge is when the DevOps topic is new to somebody, it's a little bit overwhelming. What Tim and I decided to do was put together a one-day workshop that would give someone a great introduction to the topic. We wanted to combine both lecture and hands-on configuration of a DevOps environment. So lecture topics in the workshop, we're going to cover Agile and DevOps, code version control, CI, CD, testing, and that testing will be both unit and automated testing, and then we'll touch on IAC. When we get to the hands-on part, each participant is going to build out their own pipeline. So think about that. You come into a workshop, and by the afternoon, you're going to be fully in charge of building out your own pipeline, employing CI and CD to get an application that we will provide out to an Azure app website.
Wow, so it's not just 8 hours of lectures where I slowly fall asleep in my seat?
No, it's going to be, I think we're going to do about half and half. It's going to be about half lecture and interactive questions. I guess we'll talk about the topics. We'll probably talk to everybody in the classroom about what they're doing, kind of learn from other people's experiences. And then, the second half, or probably a little more than half the class, we're actually going to get you involved in a bunch of the tools.
That's great. I know I have attended workshops in the past where it's just someone talking for 8 hours. The first hour or two, you might be okay, but then lunch hunger starts setting in, your blood sugar starts crashing, and you start getting distracted by Twitter and whatever else you have around you. So it's good to hear that you're going to keep the sessions interactive and people actually get hands-on experience.
Yeah, we're going to do it definitely hands-on, and, talking about who we're building this workshop for, we're really making it so our target audience is any person involved with IT. Anyone from a developer to an infrastructure person, a development manager, and even up to a VP of IT. I think if you can use a browser and follow basic configuration steps, we'll make sure you get through the workshop. Our main goal is that for each person that joins us, they know what their next steps are for better understanding DevOps when they leave. An executive will know the right questions to ask his development manager. A programmer might decide to dig deeper into build servers or unit tests. An infrastructure person will better understand maybe a little bit about the development pipeline and better questions to ask developers, and maybe even start investigating IAC.
Okay, great. And you said this is going to be leveraging Azure. So I guess we're going to be using the Azure tool sets for
well, we're going to use not all that. We're trying to go with a little more of an open source spin, so we're not going fully with Microsoft flavor. So we're going to use Subversion as our version control. We'll use TeamCity as our build server. We'll use Octopus deploy for delivery or deployment, but we will be deploying into the Azure public cloud, and we're going to use Azure apps. And so everyone will have their own SVN instance, TeamCity, Octopus, and you'll have your own Azure app that you'll be deploying to. And the beauty of the class is Tim spent a lot of time building this all through IAC, so he can build out a workshop environment, and all your tools are out there, and then at the end of the class we'll break it all back down again. So it really employs a Phoenix environment, so to speak, for the whole class.
So the workshop setup is itself using CI/CD and DevOps principles to instantiate.
Yeah, and that's kind of how this whole workshop came about. I mean, we were getting asked a lot when we were talking to clients about DevOps, and as we were investigating and working with our existing clients, we kept doing the same thing over and over and again. And we finally ended up saying, well, let's put a course or a workshop together to help, I guess, introduce people to this topic.
Okay, great. So if I'm interested in attending, and I am, how can I get more information and sign up?
All right, well, the easiest way is to go to the Anexinet website, and there's a little search box in the top, and if you just type the word workshop, you'll get a link to the workshop. It'll give you an overview page, and you click the link, and it takes you to a event site that you can sign up.
Okay.
The course is December 15th.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be at the MTC, the Microsoft Training Center.
Mm-hmm.
And so
That's in Malvern, correct?
Yeah, that's correct, Malvern. And it'll be all day. We'll have lunch provided, and you'll get to listen to Tim and I for not 8 hours because we're going to work. We'll be talking, and you'll be interactively banging on the keys.
Awesome. So sounds great. I do plan to attend, so I'll be there. So if listeners are interested in also meeting me, you can come up and say hi to me as well.
So we can fire all IAC questions at you, Ned?
If you are feeling, if I'm feeling lucky, absolutely. I'll do my best to answer whatever you can throw at me.
Great.
I certainly have gained a bit of experience in both, and recently achieved my SysOps admin cert in AWS.
All right, nice.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Excellent.
It was very interesting. I'm thinking about sitting for the Devops admin, which apparently is very difficult. So I'll probably fail it the first time, but that's why you take it multiple times, right?
That's good.
So thank you so much, Tim and Tom, for joining me today. If listeners want to know more about you and what you do, where should they look, Tom?
Well, I have a profile on LinkedIn that probably needs a little bit of updating, but you can always get me through Anexinet if you want to talk more about DevOps, or come out December 15th and join us at the workshop. But you can find me, Thomas Jadico, Jadico. So I spell my last name, and you can find me on LinkedIn and connect with me there.
Okay, great. And Tim?
Well, it's pretty much the same thing. You can contact me through Anexinet, or we'll provide a link for my LinkedIn profile as well.
Okay, great. And last question, I like to ask this for all guests. Tom, you first. What's your favorite 80s movie?
My favorite 80s movie, Point Break.
Point Break. All right. And Tim?
You put me on the spot. I'm not real great with movies, but I would say if I had to pick one, Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Raiders of the Lost Ark. Hey, you can't go wrong with either of those choices.
What was yours, Ned?
No one's asked me that yet.
See what happens when someone throws a question at you real quick?
Willow.
Really?
Yeah, I'm going with Willow.
Was that Tom Cruise in that?
No. It was Val Kilmer was Mad Mardigan. The thing about Willow that I loved is it built this whole very interesting universe and then completely failed to deliver on it in any subsequent movies because it bombed at the box office. But I feel like it had that potential, right? To be like Lord of the Rings, but not as boring.
Yeah, I didn't make it through Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I'm probably going to get some hate mail for that one.
But if you get hate mail, that means people are actually listening to your podcast.
It's a valid point. Great. Well, Tim George and Tom Jadico, CICD champions and DevOps dudes, thank you so much for joining me today on the AnexiPod. If you'd like to know more about the Devops Workshop at the Malvern Microsoft Training Center, I will post links in the show notes. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Ned. Thanks for having us.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Special thanks go out to Tim and Tom for sharing their insight into DevOps and CICD. If you can, I definitely encourage you to attend the Devops Workshop they are running on December 15th. I'll be there, too, to sharpen my skills up. Thanks to Catherine and Patty for helping me pull this together. We are listed in the iTunes directory, so please check it out and subscribe. If you're feeling particularly generous, why not leave a review? I'd sure appreciate it. Thanks to Lee Rosevere and, this time, Tom Jadico for providing the music for AnexiPod. Thanks to Anexinet for helping me produce this podcast. If you're looking for a company to help you with your digital, strategy, or technology needs, then I would recommend reaching out to Anexinet to see how they can help. And finally, thanks to you, dear listener, for tuning in. Without you, I would be a lunatic talking in a room to myself. If you'd like to know more about me and what I'm up to, you can check me out on Twitter at Ned1313 or my website, nedinthecloud.com. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, IT moves pretty fast. If you don't stop to look around once in a while, you could miss it.
My girlfriend is somebody who would dump me if she knew I was with you. It's like having your cake and pie too. I'm in trouble. I think I'm in trouble.